The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of Kepler 442b like the dying screams of ancient gods. Dr. Sarah Chun pulled her thermal suit tighter around her body as she trudged through knee-deep snow, her breath forming crystal clouds that immediately froze and fell to the ground like tiny glass shards. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, and their research station's power grid was failing. "Sarah, you need to get back here now." Marcus's voice crackled through her comm unit, barely audible over the screaming wind. "The main generator just went offline. We've got maybe 6 hours of backup power left." Sarah stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking. 6 hours wasn't nearly enough time to complete the mineral survey that had brought their small research team to this ice-locked planet in the first place. The rare crystalline formations they discovered could revolutionize faster-than-light travel, but only if they could extract samples before the orbital window closed in 2 days. "Copy that, Marcus. I'm about 2 clicks out from the eastern ridge. Give me 30 minutes to finish scanning this sector, then I'll head back." She adjusted her geological scanner and continued forward, each step a battle against the relentless wind. The planet Kepler 442b was officially classified as uninhabitable. Average temperature, -60 Celsius. Atmosphere, thin and toxic. Native life, none detected. But the surveys had been wrong about that last part. 3 months into their mission, they discovered something that challenged everything humanity thought they knew about life in extreme environments. Dragons. Not the mythical beasts from Earth's ancient stories, but something far more wondrous and alien. The creatures were roughly the size of large cats, with crystalline scales that seemed to absorb and refract the planet's pale sunlight. Their wings were translucent membranes stretched between delicate bone structures, and their eyes glowed with an inner bioluminescence that pulsed in complex patterns. The research team had observed them from a distance, documenting their behavior and trying to understand how they survived in such brutal conditions. The dragons seemed to feed on the planet's unique energy-rich crystals, and they could somehow regulate their internal temperature to survive the extreme cold. But 3 days ago, when the storm began, the dragons had vanished. Sarah assumed they'd retreated to deep caves or underground thermal vents. She hadn't seen a single one since the weather turned violet. The geological scanner in her hands beeped softly, indicating a strong crystal formation beneath the ice. Sarah knelt down and began clearing away the snow with her gloved hands, revealing a patch of the iridescent blue crystals they'd been cataloging. As she worked to extract a sample, something caught her eye. A splash of color against the white landscape. Dark purple and gold, partially buried in a snowdrift about 20 meters away. Sarah's pulse quickened. Those colors matched the descriptions in her xenobiology notes. She abandoned the crystal sample and pushed through the snow toward the spot of color, her boots sinking deep with each step. What she found made her gasp. 2 baby dragons, no bigger than kittens, huddled together beneath a thin overhang of ice. Their scales had lost their usual luminescent glow and appeared dull and lifeless. One was purple with gold markings along its wing membranes. The other was smaller, silver blue with intricate patterns that looked like frost fractals. Both were barely moving. Sarah pulled off her thick gloves and reached toward them carefully. The larger one's eyes fluttered open at her approach, revealing pupils that dilated with what looked like fear. But it didn't try to flee. It couldn't. Both creatures were suffering from severe hypothermia, their small bodies slowly shutting down despite their natural cold resistance. "Oh, you poor little things," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Where are your parents?" She looked around desperately, but saw no sign of adult dragons. The storm must have separated them from their family, and now they were dying alone in the frozen wilderness. Sarah's training told her not to interfere with native wildlife. The non-intervention protocols were clear: observe, document, but don't disrupt natural processes. But as she looked down at the 2 tiny creatures, slowly freezing to death. Every instinct she possessed as a human being rebelled against those protocols. She couldn't just leave them to die. Without hesitation, Sarah unzipped her thermal suit and carefully scooped up both baby dragons. They were surprisingly light, their bodies feeling cold even through her insulated undergarments. She tucked them against her chest, inside her suit, and zipped it back up around them. The effect was immediate. Both dragons began to move more actively, their eyes brightening as they absorbed her body heat. The smaller one made a sound like a tiny bell chiming, while the larger one nuzzled against her collarbone with its small snout. "Sarah, what's your status?" Marcus's voice came through her comm again, more urgent this time. "The storm's getting worse. You need to get back here now." "On my way," she replied, adjusting her grip on the dragons hidden beneath her suit. "Had some equipment trouble, but I'm mobile again." The journey back to the research station was the longest 30 minutes of Sarah's life. The wind had intensified to hurricane force, and visibility was down to mere meters. Several times she had to stop and use her suit's emergency beacon to reorient herself when the swirling snow completely obscured her surroundings. But throughout the harrowing trek, she could feel the two small lives pressed against her chest, their bodies gradually warming as they absorbed her heat. The larger dragon had wrapped its tiny claws gently around the fabric of her undergarment, as if understanding that it needed to hold on. The smaller one had curled up against her ribcage and was making soft purring sounds that vibrated through her chest. By the time Sarah reached the station, both dragons were alert and active, their scales beginning to show the first hints of their natural glow. She paused outside the airlock, knowing that once she went inside, there would be questions. Her teammates would want to know why she'd violated non-intervention protocols. Command would probably recall the entire mission if they found out she'd interfered with native wildlife. But as she felt the two small creatures moving against her chest, alive and warming up thanks to human compassion, Sarah realized she didn't care about the consequences. The airlock cycled, and she stepped into the station's main corridor. The warm air felt like a blessing after hours in the brutal cold, and she could feel the dragons responding to the temperature change, becoming more active and curious. "Sarah, thank God you made it back." Marcus appeared around the corner, his face showing relief mixed with worry. "We've been tracking the storm on satellite, and it's only getting worse. This might be the biggest weather event this planet has seen in decades." Dr. James Wright, the team's xenobiologist, emerged from the lab section. "Did you manage to get any samples? The mineral composition data could be crucial for the extraction process." Sarah nodded, her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to handle the situation. "I got some readings, but the extraction equipment malfunctioned in the cold. We'll need to try again when the storm passes." She was acutely aware of the small movements beneath her suit. One of the dragons had discovered the zipper pull and was gently batting at it with its tiny claws. She needed to get to her quarters quickly before someone noticed. "I need to get out of this gear and warm up," she said, moving toward the residential section. The cold was brutal out there. "Of course," Marcus said. "Get some rest. We'll reassess our options in the morning." Sarah made it to her small private quarters without incident, quickly sealing the door behind her. The moment she was alone, she carefully unzipped her thermal suit and looked down at her unexpected passengers. Both dragons immediately perked up, their eyes wide as they took in their new surroundings. The larger one, which she was already thinking of as Spark due to its purple and gold coloring, climbed up to her shoulder and began exploring her hair with obvious curiosity. The smaller silver-blue one, which she decided to call Frost, remained pressed against her chest but lifted its head to look around the room. "Welcome to my humble abode," Sarah whispered, gently stroking Frost's scales. The texture was unlike anything she'd ever felt, smooth as glass, but somehow warm to the touch despite the creature's recent hypothermia. Both dragons were clearly juvenile, probably only a few weeks old based on their size and behavior. Their scales weren't fully developed yet, lacking the complex patterns and deep luminescence she'd observed in the adult specimens. But even so, they were breathtakingly beautiful. Spark had discovered the small mirror above Sarah's sink and was tilting its head back and forth, apparently fascinated by its own reflection. Every few seconds, it would make soft chirping sounds, as if trying to communicate with the dragon in the mirror. Frost, meanwhile, had begun grooming itself with tiny cat-like motions. Its scales seemed to shimmer and shift color slightly as it cleaned them, cycling through shades of silver, blue, and pale lavender. Sarah watched them with growing wonder and concern. What did baby dragons eat? How long could they survive away from their natural environment? And, most importantly, what would happen when the rest of the team discovered what she'd done? A soft knock at her door made her freeze. Both dragons immediately went still, their survival instincts kicking in. "Sarah, are you okay in there?" It was Dr. Wright's voice. "I wanted to discuss the mineral samples you collected." "Just getting cleaned up," Sarah called back, her heart racing. "Can we talk in the morning?" "Of course. I just wanted to say, well done out there today. I know the conditions were terrible, but the data you collected could be vital for our mission." Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't collected any meaningful data. Instead, she'd rescued 2 alien creatures and probably jeopardized the entire research mission. But as she looked down at Spark and Frost, both now looking up at her with their large, luminous eyes, she knew she'd made the right choice. "Thanks, James. I'll have a full report ready tomorrow." She waited until his footsteps faded before allowing herself to breathe again. This was going to be more complicated than she'd initially thought. The dragons seemed to sense her stress. Spark climbed down from her shoulder and nuzzled against her hand, while Frost made soft, comforting sounds. Despite being rescued by a completely alien species, they showed no fear of her now. If anything, they seemed to trust her completely. Sarah sat on her narrow bunk and carefully lifted both creatures on her lap. They immediately cuddled together, but maintained contact with her hands, as if they understood that her warmth and presence meant safety. "I don't know what I'm going to do with you two," she murmured, gently stroking their scales. "But I couldn't leave you out there to die." Outside her window, the storm continued to rage. The research station's lights flickered occasionally as the backup generators struggled against the extreme conditions. But inside her small quarters, warmed by human compassion and alien trust, a different kind of light was beginning to shine. Spark and Frost had survived their first encounter with a human being. More than that, they found someone willing to risk everything to keep them safe. But their adventure was just beginning. The storm showed no signs of abating. The research mission was hanging by a thread, and Sarah had no idea how she was going to explain her new responsibilities to her teammates. All she knew for certain was that she couldn't abandon these creatures now. They'd become her responsibility the moment she'd chosen compassion over protocol. And despite the challenges ahead, as she watched Spark and Frost settle into comfortable sleep on her lap, their scales glowing softly with contentment, Sarah realized that this might be the most important discovery of her entire career. Not the energy crystals that could revolutionize space travel, but the simple, universal truth that life recognizes life, and that compassion needs no translation across the vast distances between stars. Sarah woke to the gentle sensation of tiny claws kneading against her shoulder. The storm still raged outside, but the absolute fury of the previous day had diminished to a steady howl. Pale morning light filtered through her small window, casting everything in shades of blue and silver. Spark was perched on her shoulder, apparently fascinated by the ice crystals forming on the inside of the window. The little dragon pressed its snout against the glass and made soft trilling sounds, its breath fogging the surface. Frost was curled up against Sarah's neck, still sleeping, its scales shifting through subtle color changes as it dreamed. Sarah carefully sat up, trying not to disturb either creature. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night worrying about what she was going to do next. The dragons needed food, and she had no idea what they ate. They needed a safe place to hide, and her quarters were hardly secure from discovery. Most urgently, they needed to be reunited with their family, but the storm made any search impossible. A soft chime from her comm unit made her freeze. Incoming message from command. Dr. Chun, this is Mission Control. Please respond at your earliest convenience. We've been monitoring the weather patterns on your location, and we're concerned about the integrity of your mission timeline. Please provide a full status update on current operations and projected completion dates. Sarah's heart sank. Command was getting nervous about the delays. If they decided the mission was compromised, they'd order an immediate evacuation. The orbital window for extraction was narrow, and missing it would mean stranding the team for another 6 months until the next transport could reach them. 6 months that these baby dragons might not have without their family. Spark had noticed the comm unit's blinking light and was trying to catch it with tiny paws, apparently thinking it was some kind of prey. Despite her worries, Sarah couldn't help but smile. The little creature's curiosity and playfulness reminded her of Earth kittens, but with an alien intelligence that seemed far more advanced than any terrestrial animal she'd encountered. Frost stirred at the sound of her movement, opening eyes that now glowed with healthy bioluminescence. The smaller dragon stretched in a remarkably cat-like manner, then began grooming its wing membranes with delicate precision. A knock at her door made all 3 of them freeze. Sarah, are you awake? It was Marcus. We need to talk about our options. The storm's supposed to clear by this afternoon, but we've lost a lot of time. Give me 5 minutes, Sarah called back, her mind racing. She needed to find somewhere safe to hide Spark and Frost, at least temporarily. She looked around her small quarters desperately. The ventilation grate was too small. The storage locker was too exposed. Then, her eyes fell on the emergency supply container under her bunk. It was insulated, had its own small heating element, and was designed to be completely sealed. I'm sorry, she whispered to the dragons as she carefully lifted them. This is just temporary, I promise. To her surprise, both creatures seemed to understand. They didn't struggle as she gently placed them in the container with some of her softer clothing for bedding. Spark looked up at her with what appeared to be complete trust, while Frost curled up immediately as if preparing for another nap. Sarah sealed the container, making sure the heating element was activated and the air circulation was functioning. The dragons would be safe and warm for a few hours, but she needed to find a better solution quickly. She dressed quickly and stepped out into the corridor, nearly colliding with Dr. Wright. Sarah, perfect timing. James looked exhausted, his usually neat hair disheveled, and his eyes red from lack of sleep. I've been analyzing the atmospheric data from yesterday's storm, and I think we might have stumbled onto something incredible. What do you mean? Sarah tried to keep her voice casual, but her pulse quickened. Had he somehow detected the dragon's presence? The energy readings I'm getting don't match anything in our database. There are massive bioelectrical signatures all across the planet, but they don't correspond to any known geological phenomena. I think there might be life forms here that we haven't detected yet. Sarah's mouth went dry. Life forms, large ones, based on the energy output, possibly intelligent. And here's the really interesting part. The signatures intensified dramatically when the storm started, like whatever's out there was actively responding to the weather patterns. He pulled up a holographic display from his tablet, showing swirling patterns of energy across the planet's surface. Sarah could see concentrated nodes of activity, particularly around the mountainous regions where she'd first observed the adult dragons. The signals are strongest in the areas where we detected those crystalline formations, James continued, his excitement evident despite his fatigue. I think the creatures might be using the crystals as some kind of energy source. This could completely change our understanding of how life can adapt to extreme environments. Marcus appeared from the common area, looking grim. I hate to interrupt the science, but we've got bigger problems. I just got off a call with command. They're threatening to abort the mission if we can't show significant progress within the next 48 hours. 48 hours? James looked stricken. But the storm dash, I know. But they're worried about the orbital mechanics. If we miss the extraction window, we're stuck here for another 6 months, and Command doesn't want to allocate resources for an extended mission. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. 48 hours wasn't nearly enough time to find Spark and Frost's family and ensure their safety. But if the mission was aborted, the dragons would be trapped in the research station when the team evacuated. Unless she found another solution. What if we could prove that there's intelligent life here? She said suddenly. That would change everything, wouldn't it? Command would have to extend the mission to establish first contact protocols. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Do you have evidence of intelligent life? Sarah hesitated. The dragons she'd observed from a distance had shown complex behaviors, but proving intelligence would require close study and documentation. And that would mean revealing Spark and Frost. James's energy readings suggest something significant, she said carefully. What if we could get closer to the source? Document actual behavior patterns? In this weather? Marcus shook his head. It's suicide to go back out there before the storm passes completely. But once it clears, Sarah pressed, we could mount a proper expedition. Use the full sensor array, maybe even attempt communication. James's eyes lit up with scientific enthusiasm. The bioelectrical patterns I'm detecting do show some characteristics that could indicate complex cognition. If we could establish that these creatures are truly intelligent, Command would have to classify this as a first contact scenario. Marcus finished, understanding dawning in his expression, which would automatically extend our mission timeline and bring in specialist teams. Sarah nodded, her heart racing. It was a risky plan, but it might be the only way to buy enough time to help Spark and Frost. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm from the environmental systems. Marcus cursed and headed for the control panel. The heating system's overloaded, he called out. We're drawing too much power somewhere. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The emergency container's heating element was designed for short-term use only. If it was drawing excessive power, it would show up on the station systems. I'll check the residential section, she said quickly, heading back toward her quarters. She sealed her door behind her and immediately opened the emergency container. Both dragons looked up at her with bright, alert eyes, apparently none the worse for their temporary confinement. But the heating element was indeed running hot, far hotter than it should have been. Then, Sarah noticed something incredible. The dragon's scales were glowing brighter than she'd ever seen them, pulsing with rhythmic patterns of light. And the heating element's temperature gauge was reading normal, despite the alarm she'd heard. The dragons weren't just absorbing the heat. They were regulating it. You little geniuses, she whispered, carefully lifting them out of the container. You've been controlling the temperature, haven't you? Spark chirped softly and nuzzled her hand, while Frost's scales shifted to a warm golden hue. Both creatures seemed perfectly comfortable despite having been confined in a small space for over an hour. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. If the dragons could actively regulate thermal energy, it suggested a level of bioelectrical control that bordered on the technological. Combined with James's readings of planet-wide energy patterns, it painted a picture of a species far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Her comm unit chimed again. This time, it was a priority message directly from Command. Dr. Chun, we've been reviewing the mission parameters and current conditions. Given the severe weather delays and the approaching extraction window, we're implementing Contingency Protocol 7. You have 36 hours to provide compelling evidence that the mission objectives can be met. Otherwise, we're initiating emergency evacuation procedures. 36 hours. Even less time than Marcus had thought. Sarah looked down at Spark and Frost, both now exploring her quarters with renewed curiosity. Spark had discovered her tablet and was gently tapping the screen with one claw, apparently fascinated by the changing displays. Frost was investigating her research notes, its eyes tracking across the text with unmistakable intelligence. I need your help, she said softly to the dragons. I need to prove that your species is intelligent, that you're more than just animals. Can you understand me? Both dragons stopped what they were doing and looked at her. For a moment, Sarah felt foolish for talking to alien creatures, as if they were human children. But then Spark did something that made her heart skip a beat. The little dragon approached her tablet and deliberately pressed its claw against the screen in a specific pattern. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The universal mathematical constant for intelligence recognition that humanity had been broadcasting into space for decades. Frost immediately joined in, adding its own pattern. The first few numbers of the Fibonacci sequence tapped out on the metal surface of her desk. Sarah stared in amazement. Not only did the dragons understand her request, but they were demonstrating mathematical knowledge that proved beyond doubt that they were dealing with an intelligent species. But even as excitement flooded through her, she realized the magnitude of what this meant. First contact with an alien intelligence was the most significant event in human history. The protocols were strict, the procedures complex, and the implications staggering. And she was sitting in her quarters with 2 baby members of this species, having violated every non-intervention directive in the book. Her comm unit chimed with an incoming call from Marcus. Sarah, something's happening with the energy readings. James thinks we might be detecting some kind of communication network. Can you get to the lab? We need all hands on this. On my way, she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She looked down at Spark and Frost, both now watching her with obvious intelligence gleaming in their luminous eyes. This changes everything, she whispered. Your people aren't just animals. You're a civilization. And somewhere out in the storm, that civilization was looking for 2 missing children. Sarah realized that her decision to save 2 small lives might have just triggered the most important moment in human history. But first, she had to figure out how to reveal the truth without destroying everything she'd worked to protect. The next 36 hours would determine not just the fate of her mission, but the future relationship between 2 intelligent species separated by the vast darkness of space, brought together by a simple act of human compassion on a world of ice and storm. Sarah stood in the main laboratory, watching James frantically adjust sensor arrays while Marcus coordinated with command through multiple communication channels. The energy readings were unprecedented. Vast networks of bioelectrical activity stretching across continents, pulsing with what appeared to be coordinated patterns. It's like nothing we've ever seen, James muttered, his fingers dancing across holographic displays. The complexity is staggering. These aren't random biological signatures. This is organized, structured, almost like a planetary communication network, Sarah finished quietly. Exactly. And it's intensifying. Whatever these creatures are, they're actively searching for something. Sarah's heart clenched. Of course they were searching. 2 of their young were missing, taken by an alien creature during the worst storm in decades. She could only imagine the panic and desperation that must be driving the search efforts. In her quarters, carefully hidden, Spark and Frost were probably sensing the same energy patterns. Dragons with the ability to manipulate thermal and electrical fields would certainly be able to detect the massive coordination effort taking place across their world. Sarah, you've had the most field experience with a local environment, Marcus said, turning from his communication station. What's your assessment? Could we be looking at a technologically advanced species? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew she was at a crossroads. Every instinct told her to reveal the truth about Spark and Frost, to explain that she had direct evidence of dragon intelligence. But doing so would expose her violation of protocol and potentially endanger the baby dragons. Before she could answer, the station's proximity alarms began blaring. Something's approaching from the northeast, James called out, his face pale as he monitored the external sensors. Multiple contacts, moving fast despite the storm conditions. Marcus rushed to the main display console. The storm was still raging outside, but through the swirling snow, they could see lights approaching. Not the mechanical lights of human technology, but something organic and pulsing. Bioluminescent signatures, Sarah breathed, recognizing the patterns immediately. It's them. The dragons. Dragons? Marcus spun to face her. What dragons? Sarah realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late to backtrack. The native life forms I've been observing. The crystalline creatures. I've been calling them dragons because of their appearance. Through the external cameras, they could now see them clearly. Dozens of adult dragons, their scales glowing with coordinated patterns of light, flying in formation despite the brutal wind and snow. They were magnificent and terrifying, each one nearly 2 meters in length with wings that seemed to shimmer with internal energy. "My God," James whispered. "They're beautiful. And the energy readings, they're off the charts." The dragons circled the research station in complex patterns, their bioluminescent displays creating an intricate light show against the storm. Sarah watched in fascination and growing dread as the patterns became increasingly agitated and urgent. "They're trying to communicate," she said, her scientific training overriding her personal fears. The light patterns, the flight formations, it's structured communication. Marcus was already reaching for the emergency protocols. "I'm activating the defense grid. We don't know if they're hostile." "No." Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp with urgency. "Don't activate any defensive measures. They're not attacking. They're searching." Searching for what? Sarah's mind raced. She could hear faint sounds from her quarters, soft chirping and trilling that only she would recognize as responses to the adult dragons outside. Spark and Frost were calling out to their people, their young voices too weak to penetrate the station's walls. I think they're missing someone," she said carefully. "Young ones, maybe." The storm was severe enough to separate families. The lead dragon, distinguished by particularly elaborate gold and silver markings, landed on the platform directly in front of the station's main viewport. It approached slowly, deliberately, its massive head tilting as it examined the human structure with obvious intelligence. Then it began to glow. The patterns that emerged on its scales were unlike anything Sarah had observed before. Complex mathematical sequences, geometric patterns, and something that looked remarkably like stellar coordinates. The dragon was attempting systematic first contact protocols. "It's trying to establish communication," James said in amazement. "These patterns, they're showing us their understanding of mathematics, astronomy, even what might be their planetary coordinate system." The dragon paused, clearly waiting for a response. When none came from the humans, it began repeating the patterns, but with increasing agitation. Other dragons landed around the station, adding their own light displays to the communication attempt. Sarah realized they were running out of time. The dragons were becoming more desperate, and if the humans couldn't or wouldn't respond appropriately, the situation could escalate quickly. In her quarters, the chirping was becoming louder and more distressed. "I need to get something from my room," Sarah said, heading for the door. "Sarah, wait," Marcus called after her. "We should stay together until we understand their intentions." But Sarah was already moving. She reached her quarters just as Spark and Frost were becoming truly agitated, their scales pulsing with urgent patterns that matched the displays outside. They looked up at her with pleading eyes, clearly desperate to respond to their family's calls. "I know," Sarah whispered, gently lifting both creatures. "I know you want to go to them, but I need you to help me do this the right way." She carried them back to the main lab, where Marcus and James were still trying to interpret the dragon's communication attempts. Both men froze when they saw what she was carrying. "Sarah," Marcus said slowly, "please tell me you didn't." "I found them yesterday during the storm," Sarah said quickly, before anyone could object. "Two juveniles, nearly dead from hypothermia. I couldn't leave them to die." James stared in fascination. "Juvenile specimens, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means for our understanding of their life cycle and social structure?" "It means," Marcus said grimly, "that we violated first contact protocols in the worst possible way. We've kidnapped their children." Spark and Frost were now glowing brightly, their patterns clearly visible to the adult dragons outside. The response was immediate and dramatic. The lead dragon's bioluminescence intensified to an almost blinding degree, and its calls became deeper and more urgent. Other dragons began landing on the station's external platforms, their massive forms surrounding the building. The sound of their calls penetrated even the station's insulated walls, deep, melodic tones that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. "They know their young are in here," Sarah said, feeling the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "They've come to get them back." This could be seen as an act of aggression by their species, Marcus said, his hand hovering over the emergency beacon that would summon immediate extraction. "We could be triggering an interstellar incident." Or, Sarah said firmly, "we could be about to achieve first contact with an intelligent species. These aren't animals, Marcus. They're people. And, right now, they're just parents trying to get their children back." To demonstrate her point, Sarah carried Spark and Frost to the main viewport. Both baby dragons immediately began responding to the adults outside with complex light patterns and soft calls. The adult dragons' agitation visibly decreased as they saw their young were safe and healthy. The lead dragon approached the viewport and touched its massive snout to the transparent barrier, looking directly at Sarah. For a moment, human and dragon regarded each other across the species divide, both recognizing intelligence in the other's eyes. Then, the dragon did something that took everyone's breath away. It placed one claw against the viewport and began tapping out a rhythm, the same mathematical sequence that Spark had demonstrated earlier. A direct acknowledgement that it understood Sarah was intelligent and was attempting to communicate. "It's trying to thank you," James whispered in amazement. "It knows you saved them." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of the moment. First contact with an alien intelligence, and it was happening not through grand diplomatic gestures or military posturing, but through the simple, universal language of parental love and gratitude. She placed her own hand against the viewport, mirroring the dragon's gesture. The massive creature's eyes seemed to brighten, and it began a new pattern of bioluminescence, slower, gentler, somehow conveying peace and understanding. "We need to find a way to safely return the juveniles," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we also need to document this properly. This is the most important moment in human history." Marcus was already activating recording systems and opening a priority channel to Command. "Command, this is Research Station Kepler. We have achieved confirmed first contact with an indigenous intelligent species. Repeat, we have first contact. Requesting immediate guidance on formal diplomatic protocols." The response from Command was swift and overwhelming. Within minutes, the communication channels were flooded with incoming transmissions from xenobiology specialists, diplomatic corps representatives, and military advisors. But in the research station, surrounded by magnificent alien beings who had come to reclaim their children, the reality was much simpler. Sarah held Spark and Frost close to the viewport, allowing them to see their family, while the adult dragons maintained their patient vigil outside. "How we get them back to their people safely?" James asked, studying the external conditions. "The storm's still too dangerous for any of us to go outside, and I don't think we can open the airlocks without compromising station integrity." Sarah thought for a moment, then looked down at Spark and Frost. Both young dragons were watching her intently, as if they understood the discussion taking place. "What if there's another way?" she said slowly. "These creatures can manipulate thermal and electrical energy. They've been regulating temperature since I brought them inside. What if they could create a safe passage themselves?" As if responding to her suggestion, Spark suddenly chirped and flew to the environmental control panel. With precise movements of its tiny claws, it began adjusting the airlock controls. "It's accessing our systems," James breathed. "The bioelectrical interface capability, they could potentially interact with any electronic system." Frost joined Spark at the control panel, and together they began implementing what appeared to be a carefully planned sequence. The station's atmospheric readings showed the airlock chamber gradually equalizing pressure and temperature, creating conditions that would allow safe passage between the storm outside and the protected environment inside. They're creating an atmospheric buffer zone, Sarah realized. A space where both humans and dragons can safely interact. The lead dragon outside seemed to understand what was happening. It moved to position itself directly in front of the airlock entrance, while the other adults formed a protective barrier against the storm winds. "This is it," Sarah said, her heart pounding with excitement and fear. "This is how we return them to their family and establish proper first contact protocols." But as she prepared to carry Spark and Frost to the airlock, she couldn't help but feel that she was about to lose something precious. These two small beings had trusted her completely, had shown her that intelligence and compassion transcended species boundaries. And now, as the moment approached to give them back to their rightful family, Sarah realized that this experience had changed her forever. She was no longer just a human scientist studying alien life. She had become the bridge between two intelligent species, connected by an act of simple kindness that had grown into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The airlock chamber hummed with controlled energy as Spark and Frost completed their atmospheric modifications. Sarah stood at the threshold, holding both young dragons, while Marcus and James monitored the environmental systems with growing amazement. "Atmospheric pressure stabilized," James reported. "Temperature holding at a comfortable medium between our requirements and external conditions. However, they're doing this. It's precise beyond anything we could achieve with our technology." Through the transparent barrier, the lead dragon waited patiently, its bioluminescent patterns now shifting to softer, more welcoming hues. Other adult dragons had positioned themselves to shield the entrance from the worst of the storm winds, their coordinated movements displaying a level of tactical cooperation that spoke of advanced social organization. "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "before you do this, I need you to understand the implications. The moment you step into that airlock, you'll be making direct physical contact with an alien species. There are protocols, safety measures, decontamination procedures. The protocols were written by people who never imagined this scenario," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Sometimes you have to choose between following rules and doing what's right." She looked down at Spark and Frost, both now glowing with anticipation and what appeared to be excitement. They understood they were going home, but they also seemed reluctant to leave her. Spark nuzzled against her cheek with obvious affection, while Frost wrapped its tiny claws gently around her finger. "I'll miss you too," she whispered to them. "But you belong with your family." The airlock door cycled open with a soft hiss. The atmospheric buffer zone created by the young dragons held perfectly, allowing Sarah to step forward without experiencing the brutal conditions of the storm outside. The air was crisp and clean, charged with the same energy she'd felt around the crystalline formations. The lead dragon lowered its massive head as Sarah approached, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid startling her. Up close, its scales were even more magnificent than she'd imagined, each one a perfect crystalline structure that caught and refracted light in ways that seemed to violate physics. The patterns flowing across its surface were hypnotically beautiful, mathematical in their precision, but organic in their flow. Sarah carefully extended her arms, offering Spark and Frost to their family. The lead dragon's eyes, large, luminous, and unmistakably intelligent, met hers for a moment that seemed to stretch across species and star systems. Then, with movements more gentle than she would have thought possible for such a massive creature, the dragon carefully accepted the young ones. Both Spark and Frost chirped with joy as they were reunited with their parent, their scales blazing with happy patterns of light. But instead of immediately departing, the lead dragon did something unexpected. It carefully placed Spark and Frost on the platform beside it, then approached Sarah directly. Before she could react, the massive creature gently touched her forehead with its snout. The sensation was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. A warm, electric tingle spread through her mind, and suddenly she could sense the dragon's thoughts, not as words, but as pure emotion and understanding. Gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes, recognition of her courage and compassion, and something else, an invitation. Images flashed through her mind. Vast crystalline cities built into mountainsides, dragons working together to shape their environment through bioelectrical manipulation, young dragons learning mathematics and science through patterns of light, libraries of knowledge stored in living crystal formations that responded to touch. She was being shown their civilization. The contact lasted only seconds, but when it ended, Sarah staggered backward, overwhelmed by what she'd experienced. The dragon stepped back as well, its eyes now glowing with unmistakable intelligence, and something that might have been respect. Sarah, Marcus's voice crackled through her comm unit. Your biometrics just spiked off the charts. What happened? I think, Sarah said slowly, her voice filled with wonder, I think we just established formal diplomatic contact. The lead dragon began a new pattern of bioluminescence, this one clearly directed at the other humans watching from inside the station. James was frantically recording everything, while Marcus split his attention between monitoring Sarah's safety and maintaining communications with Command. Spark and Frost, now reunited with their family but clearly reluctant to leave Sarah, began their own light display. They moved between their parent and Sarah, their patterns seeming to translate or explain the bond they'd formed with the human. Other adult dragons began landing on the platform, each one examining Sarah with obvious curiosity. She realized she was probably the first human any of them had seen up close, yet they showed no fear or aggression. If anything, they seemed fascinated by her, their bioluminescent conversations flowing in patterns too complex for her to follow. One dragon, smaller than the others, but with particularly intricate scale patterns, approached and began projecting what appeared to be mathematical equations in light. The sequences were familiar: prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, and then more complex formulas that Sarah recognized as advanced physics. They're testing your intelligence. James's voice came through her comm, trying to establish her level of scientific understanding. Sarah thought carefully, then knelt down and used her finger to trace equations in the thin layer of snow on the platform. She started with basic calculus, then moved to quantum mechanics, and finally drew the mathematical foundation for faster-than-light travel, the same principles that had brought humanity to this frozen world. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. All the dragons began glowing brighter, their patterns becoming more excited and complex. Several of them approached the equations she'd drawn, studying them with obvious comprehension. Then, the lead dragon did something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. It began projecting the same FDL equations, but with additional modifications, corrections, and improvements that could potentially increase efficiency by orders of magnitude. My God, James breathed over the comm. They're not just intelligent. They're scientifically advanced beyond our current understanding. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Humanity had traveled across the galaxy, looking for resources and new worlds to colonize. But they found something infinitely more valuable, a species that could accelerate human scientific development by centuries. But that realization brought new responsibilities and concerns. First contact protocols existed for good reasons. The introduction of advanced alien technology could destabilize human society, create conflicts over access to knowledge, or lead to the exploitation of the dragon civilization. As if sensing her sudden concern, the lead dragon approached again. This time, instead of initiating mental contact, it began a new type of display. The patterns flowing across its scales showed images of the storm, Sarah rescuing Spark and Frost, and the reunion that had just taken place. But then the images continued, showing what appeared to be dragons and humans working together, sharing knowledge, exploring the galaxy side by side. It was a vision of cooperation, not domination or exploitation. They're offering partnership, Sarah realized, speaking aloud for the benefit of her colleagues. They want to work with us, not just share technology. The communication session was interrupted by an urgent transmission from command. Marcus gestured for Sarah to return to the station, his expression tense with new information. Sarah, you need to get back here now. We got incoming ships. A full diplomatic convoy is en route. ETA, 6 hours. And they're not alone. Military escort included. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Military involvement meant command was treating this as a potential threat rather than an opportunity. She turned to the lead dragon, trying to convey urgency without causing alarm. The magnificent creature seemed to understand immediately. It approached the other dragons and began what appeared to be a rapid council session, their bioluminescent communication flowing at speeds that created almost stroboscopic effects. Spark and Frost broke away from the group and approached Sarah one last time. Both young dragons nuzzled against her hands, their scales warm and comforting. Spark chirped softly and touched her palm with its snout, and again she felt that electric connection. This time, the message was simpler but more profound. Remember us. Remember that we are friends. Remember that intelligence recognizes intelligence, regardless of species or star system. I'll remember, Sarah whispered, gently stroking both young dragons one last time. I promise. The dragons began to withdraw, but not before the lead dragon performed one final gesture. It approached the equation Sarah had drawn and added something new, coordinates. Not stellar coordinates, but something more personal. A location on this planet where humans would be welcome to establish formal contact when they were ready. They're giving us an embassy location, Sarah said in amazement. They want to continue diplomatic relations. As the dragons prepared to depart, rising into the storm on wings that defied the brutal wind conditions, Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and loss. She had achieved something unprecedented in human history. Not just first contact, but first friendship with an alien species. But she also knew that what came next would be largely out of her hands. Diplomats and military officials would take over, bringing their own agendas and protocols to a relationship that had begun with simple human compassion. Back inside the station, the atmosphere was electric with excitement and tension. James was uploading terabytes of data to command, while Marcus coordinated with the incoming diplomatic convoy. Sarah's personal comm unit was flooded with messages from xenobiology institutes, government agencies, and media outlets across human space. Sarah, Marcus said as she finished decontamination procedures, I need you to understand something. What you did out there was either the bravest or most reckless thing in human history. Maybe both. The next few days are going to be unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. I know, Sarah replied, looking out the window where the last of the dragon lights were disappearing into the storm. But it was worth it. Whatever comes next, we've proven that intelligence and compassion can transcend species boundaries. That has to count for something. 3 hours later, the storm finally began to clear. As the winds died down and visibility improved, the research team could see the results of their encounter more clearly. The dragons had left something behind. Not just the coordinates the lead dragon had drawn, but something more substantial. Crystalline structures were growing around the station, emerging from the ice like technological flowers. They pulsed with gentle bioluminescence and seemed to be creating their own microenvironment, warming the immediate area and clearing the air. They're gifts, James said in wonder as he studied the structures. Living technology that will make this environment more hospitable for us. They're already beginning to terraform this area for human habitation. Sarah watched the diplomatic ships descending through the clearing sky and felt a mixture of hope and trepidation. Humanity was about to enter a new age, one where they were no longer alone in the universe. The path forward would be complex, filled with challenges and opportunities that no one could fully predict. But it had begun with a simple choice made during a brutal ice storm. The choice to value life over protocol, compassion over procedure, and the potential for friendship over the safety of isolation. As Spark and Frost were probably learning about their adventure from their family somewhere in the crystalline cities of this frozen world, Sarah prepared to face the representatives of her own species and explain how two baby dragons had changed the course of human history. The storm was over, but the real adventure was just beginning.